At 3:47 p.m. on November 17, 2025, in a federal courthouse where justice wore handcuffs, Attorney General Letitia James filed a motion that would either save American democracy or watch it burn. Her 22-page filing contained two words that made the White House tremble: outrageous conduct. The marble halls of the Norfolk Federal Building had witnessed many battles, but none quite like this. Security cameras captured every movement as James's legal team entered through metal detectors, their briefcases heavy with evidence of government misconduct. Outside, protesters chanted her name while counter-protesters demanded her prosecution. The media circus was in full swing. Satellite trucks lined the street like tanks in formation. James, the woman who had taken down a former president in civil court, now found herself in the defendant's chair. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The prosecutor had become the prosecuted, but as she walked through those marble halls, her footsteps echoing with the weight of history, something had changed in her demeanor. This wasn't the defensive posture of someone caught in wrongdoing. This was the focused intensity of a prosecutor who had found a smoking gun. But this wasn't just another legal case. This was the story of what happens when power decides that justice has gone too far. Let me take you back to where it all began, because what happened next would redefine the very meaning of political retribution in America. January 2024, Trump was campaigning for president again, and Letitia James was a name he couldn't stop saying. At rally after rally, he called her corrupt, racist, and a wacky crook. But James had something Trump didn't: a $355 million civil fraud judgment against him. She had proven in court that Trump had lied to banks, inflated his property values, and committed systematic fraud for decades. For most prosecutors, that would be the end of the story. Case closed. Justice served. For Letitia James, it was just the beginning of her nightmare. April 18, 2025. While James was focused on protecting New Yorkers from corporate fraud, a man named Bill Pulte was crafting a letter that would change everything. Pulte wasn't just anyone. He was the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, a Trump appointee and a loyal ally. His letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi was devastating in its simplicity. James, he claimed, had committed mortgage fraud, not once, but multiple times. A house in Norfolk, Virginia, a property in Brooklyn, false statements on loan applications, the kind of charges that could destroy a career and send someone to prison for 30 years. But here's what Pulte didn't mention in his letter, and what would only come to light months later. His own investigators at Fannie Mae thought the case was garbage. May 19, 2025. FBI Director Kash Patel appeared on Fox News and confirmed what James's worst fears: the federal government was officially investigating her. "This case is being handled by our professional pros," Patel said with the kind of clinical detachment that makes your blood run cold. Professional pros. That's what they called it. But the professionals were about to be replaced by political actors in a chess game where Letitia James was the target. The investigation that followed wasn't like anything America had seen before. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't quiet. It was designed to humiliate, intimidate, and destroy. Enter Ed Martin, a man whose title, head of the Weaponization Working Group at the Department of Justice, sounded like something out of a dystopian novel. Martin wasn't content to investigate from his office in Washington. He wanted to make it personal. August 2025, Martin sent James a letter that read less like legal correspondence and more like a mob ultimatum. "Resign from office," he wrote, "to give the people of New York and America more peace than proceeding." The message was clear: step down or face the consequences. James refused. What happened next was theater of the absurd. Martin, apparently inspired by film noir, donned what James's lawyers would later describe as an Inspector Gadget-inspired beige trench coat and posed for photographs outside James's Brooklyn home. The images were plastered across social media, a federal prosecutor literally stalking an elected official. But the photos told a deeper story. Martin wasn't just posing. He was sending a message. The images showed him pointing at James's windows, studying the building's entrance, even examining her mailbox. It was psychological warfare disguised as an investigation. Neighbors reported seeing the strange man in the trench coat multiple times, creating an atmosphere of surveillance and intimidation that extended far beyond James herself. The message was clear to anyone watching. This is what happens when you challenge power. Your home becomes a crime scene, your neighborhood becomes a stage, and your privacy becomes a casualty of political warfare. But intimidation was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. September 2025. Eric Siebert, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, had been investigating James for months. Career prosecutors, the actual professionals that Director Patel had referenced, concluded there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges. The case in their professional judgment was weak. Trump's response was swift and brutal. "I want him out." Within 24 hours, Siebert resigned. Within days, Trump had appointed Lindsay Halligan as interim U.S. Attorney. Halligan wasn't a career prosecutor. She was Trump's former personal attorney, someone who had represented him during the classified documents investigation at Mar-a-Lago. The fix was in October 9, 2025. The grand jury indictment came down like a hammer. 2 counts, bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution. Maximum penalty 30 years in prison. James's crime, according to the indictment: when she bought a house in Norfolk, Virginia, in 2020 for $137,000, she allegedly told the mortgage company it would be her second home instead of a rental property. The difference in interest rates? Minimal. The potential prison sentence? Decades. But here's the kicker. James's attorneys discovered that this wasn't even the property Bill Pulte had originally complained about. The prosecutors had switched targets midstream, blindsiding James's legal team and focusing on a completely different house. It was as if the Justice Department had decided the target was more important than the crime. October 24, 2025. Norfolk Federal Courthouse. James walked into her arraignment with the dignity of someone who had spent her career fighting for justice, not running from it. The courtroom was packed with supporters and protesters, cameras clicking like machine gun fire. Every seat was filled, every aisle crowded with journalists straining to catch every word. Judge Jamar K. Walker presided over the proceedings with the gravity the moment deserved. As James stood to enter her plea, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Even the court reporters seemed to hold their breath. "Not guilty," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. The 2 words echoed through the packed courtroom like a declaration of war against the system trying to destroy her. The judge set a trial date of January 26, 2026, a date that would become seared into the memory of everyone who believed that justice should be blind to political affiliation. As James was released on her own recognizance, the symbolic weight of the moment was unmistakable. A woman who had prosecuted the powerful was now trusting those same institutions to treat her fairly. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by chanting supporters, James delivered the kind of statement that enters history books. "There's no fear today, no fear, because I believe that justice will rain down like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream." But the real bombshell was still to come. November 17, 2025. 3:47 p.m. James's attorneys filed what would become known as the outrageous conduct motion. 22 pages of devastating allegations that pulled back the curtain on what they called months of illegal and unethical behavior by government officials. The filing read like a thriller novel, but every word was documented, every accusation sourced. Bill Pulte had allegedly used his federal agency as a personal weapon against Trump's enemies. Ed Martin had violated Justice Department rules and professional ethics codes. Lindsay Halligan had proceeded with prosecutions that career attorneys said were unfounded. But the most damning evidence came from inside Fannie Mae itself. Internal messages between investigators, dated June 13, 2025, revealed what the professionals really thought about the Letitia James case. The LJ case is certainly not clear and convincing evidence of fraud. The investigators, the people who actually understood mortgage fraud, knew the case was weak, but their opinions didn't matter because this was never about mortgage fraud. This was about political retribution. The motion revealed a pattern of behavior that should terrify every American. When Fannie Mae's ethics officials tried to investigate whether Bill Pulte had improperly accessed James's mortgage records, Trump's administration fired them. When career prosecutors said the evidence was insufficient, they were removed. When the U.S. attorney refused to bring charges, he was forced out. This wasn't the American justice system. This was something else entirely. The filing also exposed Halligan's shocking violations of prosecutorial conduct. She had reached out to journalists to share criticisms about media coverage of her case. She had made statements about evidence that violated Justice Department policy. She had turned the prosecutorial process into a public relations campaign. But perhaps most damning of all was the revelation of Trump's direct involvement. In September 2025, Trump had posted a message on Truth Social that was apparently supposed to be private, calling on Attorney General Pam Bondi to move quickly against James and other perceived enemies. The message was public for all to see. The President of the United States was directly ordering the prosecution of his political opponents. This is the point where the story becomes about more than Letitia James. This is about whether America still believes in the rule of law, or whether power trumps justice. James's legal team didn't just ask for the charges to be dismissed, they asked for them to be dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be brought again. The request was based on something called outrageous government conduct, a legal standard so high that it's rarely invoked and even more rarely successful.
But if any case qualified, this was it.
The evidence of misconduct wasn't circumstantial, it was overwhelming. The administration had violated Justice Department rules, professional ethics codes, and basic principles of prosecutorial integrity. They had turned federal agencies into political weapons. They had fired career prosecutors and ethics officials who stood in their way. They had replaced professionals with political actors. And all of this was documented, provable, and undeniable. As news of the motion broke, legal experts across the political spectrum were stunned. Former prosecutors who had served under both Republican and Democratic administrations called it unprecedented. Law professors described it as a constitutional crisis in the making. Civil rights organizations warned that if this kind of political prosecution was allowed to stand, no elected official would be safe from political retaliation. The National Council of Negro Women issued a statement expressing particular concern about the broader implications for black women in leadership. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had taken down a powerful white man was now being prosecuted by that same man's hand-picked prosecutors. But James wasn't backing down. At a press conference following the filing, she stood behind a podium bearing the seal of the New York Attorney General's office and delivered a message that resonated far beyond the legal community. This is not about me. This is about all of us, in a justice system which has been weaponized and used as a tool of revenge against individuals who simply did their job. All throughout my public career, I've stood up for the rights of New Yorkers and Americans, and I will not be deterred. The stakes of her case extended far beyond her own fate. If the prosecution succeeded, it would send a chilling message to every state attorney general, every prosecutor, every law enforcement official in America: investigate the powerful at your own peril. But if James succeeded in getting the case dismissed with prejudice, it would establish a precedent that could protect the independence of the justice system for generations to come. The legal community was watching with bated breath as Judge Cameron McGowan Curry prepared to rule on the motion. Curry had already agreed to hear a related challenge to Halligan's appointment if the judge ruled that Halligan had been illegally installed as U.S. attorney. Both the James case and the related prosecution of former FBI Director James Comey could collapse entirely. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Trump's desire for revenge was so overwhelming that his administration had made mistakes so egregious that they might invalidate their own prosecutions. As we await Judge Curry's ruling, scheduled before Thanksgiving 2025, one thing is clear: this case will define how we understand the relationship between power and justice in 21st century America. Letitia James began her career as a public defender, representing people who couldn't defend themselves. She rose through the ranks of New York politics by taking on powerful interests that others were afraid to challenge. As Attorney General, she sued oil companies over climate change, pharmaceutical companies over the opioid crisis, and yes, former President Trump over systematic business fraud. She won that civil case because the evidence was overwhelming. Trump had indeed inflated property values, misled banks, and committed fraud. Multiple witnesses testified, Documents were presented, and a judge found Trump liable. It wasn't a political witch hunt. It was a legal victory based on facts and evidence. But in Trump's America, facts and evidence don't matter as much as loyalty and revenge. James had committed the ultimate sin. She had held a powerful man accountable for his actions. And now that powerful man was using the full force of the federal government to destroy her. The question facing Judge Curry isn't just whether the prosecution of Letitia James should continue. The question is whether America still believes that no one, not even presidents, is above the law. If James's motion succeeds, it will reaffirm the principle that prosecutorial power cannot be used for political revenge, that career professionals matter more than political appointees, and that justice is indeed blind to power and privilege. If the motion fails, it will signal that we have entered a new era in American politics, where the justice system is just another tool of political warfare, where investigations are launched not to pursue truth, but to settle scores, and where the powerful can use government agencies to destroy their enemies. The woman who once declared no one is above the law now finds herself fighting to prove that the law itself is above politics. The outcome of her battle will determine not just her own fate, but the fate of American democracy itself. As Letitia James prepares for trial on January 26, 2026, she carries on her shoulders the weight of every prosecutor who has ever had the courage to investigate the powerful, every attorney general who has stood up to political pressure, and every American who believes that justice should be determined by evidence, not by politics. The marble halls of justice have seen many battles between power and principle, but they have never seen anything quite like the case of Letitia James, the woman who prosecuted power and then watched as power prosecuted her back. The scales of justice are weighing truth against revenge, evidence against intimidation, courage against fear. And in a courthouse in Virginia, one brave woman stands ready to prove that in America, justice still matters more than politics. Because if Letitia James falls, we all fall. And if she stands, democracy stands with her. The verdict isn't just about mortgage documents or interest rates. It's about who we are as a nation and whether we still believe in the promise that justice is equal for all. That promise has never been more important, and it has never been in more danger. The fight for the soul of American justice continues, and Letitia James is leading the charge. But this story isn't ending in a Virginia courtroom. It's beginning there. Win or lose, James has already changed the conversation about political retribution in America. Her motion has forced federal judges to confront questions they never thought they'd have to answer. Can a president order the prosecution of his political enemies? Can federal agencies be weaponized against elected officials? Can career prosecutors be replaced by political loyalists without consequences? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. They're urgent constitutional crises that demand immediate answers. And Letitia James, the woman who started her career defending the powerless, now finds herself defending the very principles that make democracy possible. The verdict, when it comes, won't just determine her fate. It will determine whether America still believes in the radical idea that law matters more than power, that evidence matters more than politics, and that courage still has a place in the halls of justice. History is watching, democracy is waiting, and justice hangs in the balance.